think since I was young, it's always been the best therapy. I know people kind of go that cliche of driving is my therapy, but the road talks to you and it really does clear up any thoughts and lets you dive deeper into things that might be on the back of your consciousness and helps you sort out what's really on the forefront of your mind. I think my first word was car when I was a little kid, before dad or mom. I got really lucky growing up into a car family of sorts. I was probably like 7 years old and I had a little pedal car, got robbed for it. My dad knew where all the troublemaker kids hung out and he had a late 80s Dodge front wheel drive hot hatch. Lowered, loud exhaust. Went out in that car, he found them and he circled into a schoolyard, chased them up a ramp, downshifted and scared the bejesus out of them with the engine. Loud cars have always resonated with my family. My father had a repair shop and brainwashed me into becoming a car geek. My dad put me in all sorts of death traps and hoopty cars, which I must say built my appreciation for all the different driving experiences. Even when I started to learn to drive, my dad had a CS 3.0, and I think that's what really sparked my love of BMWs. What really cemented the E36 was two older kids in town had an anthracite 325 sedan, and his brother had an Estoril blue E36 M3, and they were the other Greek kids in the neighborhood. And I was like, wow, that's the car to have. By the time I became a senior in high school, I bought my first E36, and I actually bought that car hit. So one of my first learning and building experiences was with the help of my dad. I rebuilt the car. I didn't exactly have a big budget to build it, so I just kept compiling a list of what I'd want to do with my dream E36. And I guess that was always, then became my approach, is find something that needs some love and bring it back to life. He tried to point me into another career path outside of cars, but typically when parents try to sway you away from something, you only dive deeper. So I ended up going to college for auto restoration. Restoration work encompassed everything from coach building to interior work, drivetrains, engines, and the art of restoration and just cataloging and researching. I've always been drawn to vintage cars, and I just kind of like the more raw and analog feel. Being able to truly understand how a machine works without them being overly complicated is something I always like. That's really what's opened the most doors to me, is the vintage collector car world. I was building armored cars down in Hell's Kitchen after school, and my buddy from college said, "You want to come move out to LA and work at a Ferrari shop?" And that was that. And the next 8 years I spent working on some of the most high-dollar cars on the planet. I used to drive out to school in Kansas all the time, back and forth. So I've done cross-country trek quite a few times in my old E36. This one's been cross-country twice. After I moved to California, I was on a road trip back from San Diego. The motor decided to give out, and it really defeated me pretty badly. But about a week later, I committed to putting the S54 motor in the car after that point. One thing led to another, and it became a 5-year build process. After I swapped the car, I put about 40,000 miles on it, almost exclusively canyon driving. The mechanical side of it is great and very enjoyable. I know the car so well, any noise, I don't have to think twice about what it may be, or if the car's behaving a certain way, I know why it's doing that. But the paint job has become one of those, not neurotic things, but I did it right at the start of COVID. I would work on it every day after work, and I did a full glass out respray and had every panel painted off the car. So it took me about 3 months working on it. So the amount of sweat equity I have in the paintwork makes me get a little crazy about swirl marks and rock chips. as more marks go on it, I can go back to doing what I built it for and driving the snot out of it. So I try to be as mechanically sympathetic as possible because I do know all the inner workings, and I try not to abuse it, but it's too much fun too. As family gets older and you get older, you realize it's good to be close by. So I moved back to New York and helped my dad soften the reins on the shop and let him step back and see what I could do with the business. My father had a stroke, not serious, but nobody's getting any younger. And also, the East Coast has a certain energy that I missed pretty immensely. Although it was really hard to leave kind of the mecca of car culture, I felt that I could do more for myself and my business back east. And I felt like there was a pretty big void, especially with the vintage stuff, so I thought it was a good time to seize that opportunity. I remember when I moved back from California, I was going through my little knickknacks in my room and I found an old index card with like a list of every mod that I thought would be amazing to have if I could afford it. It was kind of a full circle moment. I looked outside and I looked at my car and I by far surpassed any mods I thought I would do as a 19-year-old kid. Any project car is never really done being built, but it did help me feel like I reached a benchmark and I started to shift more of my goals and my focus towards the business side of the car world, and been lucky enough to have space to work on my cars and store my cars. Global warming and whatnot, we've had streaks of warm weeks and I try to exercise it as much as I can. I built it to drive it and not to stare at it in a garage, so I make good use of it. This motor is a very visceral experience and it's a high revving 6-cylinder. The suspension's stiff and the tires are super sticky, so half the time I don't have the radio on in the car when I'm driving by myself, and just truly rolling through the gears and hearing the feedback from the engine is all that it takes to clear my mind. After a work week of wrenching on other people's cars, to get into my own car and it has its own unique soundtrack, it kind of just erases the whole week for me, and it's a nice reset and start to the weekend. I was never like a big sports team person. The only sport I ever did was wrestle, and even that is like a very independent thing. So with the cars, there's a very strong community, but it's highly independent and kind of a creative outlet of sorts. And that to me is really half the joy of the car community and cars in general. I like the building process and the aspirations and end goals you have for a car, and they really help shape friendships along the way, all the different car communities. It's a very, very unique thing. I like that ability to express and do things your own way, but realize that you're not alone in it, but there's a lot of people trying to do the same thing, which I find to be a very cool dynamic to the car scene.